For nearly a decade, two of the most famous names in America orbited each other, without ever quite touching. One was a president who rarely let a headline pass him by. The other was a singer who spent 60 years perfecting the art of saying nothing controversial at all. This is the real story of how Donald Trump and Dolly Parton crossed paths again and again, through a medal offered 3 times and refused 3 times, through interviews where she simply would not take the bait, through a quiet $1 million donation that ended up tangled in his biggest pandemic program, and finally, after her death, through a flag lowered in her honor that she never asked for and for most of her life would probably have tried to talk her way out of. It started, as so much of the story does, with an award. During his first term, Donald Trump's White House twice offered Dolly Parton the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor a president can bestow. Twice, she said no. Her reasons, by her own account, had nothing to do with politics. She later explained that the timing of the first offer coincided with her husband Carl Dean's illness, and she did not want to leave his side for a ceremony in Washington. The second time, the country was in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, and she was not willing to travel during it. On the surface, at least, these were the choices of a woman putting her family and her health first, not a political statement of any kind. Then Joe Biden took office, and his administration extended the same offer. This time, Parton hesitated for an entirely different reason, accepting a presidential honor under a new administration, after declining it twice under the last one, risked looking like she was picking a side, and picking sides was the one thing she had spent her entire career trying to avoid, regardless of which party was doing the asking. She turned that offer down too. By the time all of this became public knowledge, the full picture was clear. Parton had declined the Presidential Medal of Freedom 3 separate times, across 2 different administrations, twice from Trump and once from Biden. It made her one of a small handful of public figures to turn down the same national honor from presidents on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Even Barack Obama weighed in on the subject once, years later, during an appearance on a late-night talk show. He admitted, with some self-deprecating humor, that never giving Parton the award during his own presidency had been an oversight on his part, and joked that he ought to call Biden and get it sorted out. It was a small moment, but it captured something real. By the 2020s, the Presidential Medal of Freedom had quietly become the one honor that every recent administration seemed eager to give Dolly Parton, and the one she kept declining no matter who was offering it. What made her repeated refusal stand out was that Parton's fame had never depended on being close to political power in the first place. Her reputation was built on decades of songwriting, recording, business ventures, and philanthropy, and on a rare ability to stay beloved by audiences who agreed on almost nothing else politically. Turning down the medal wasn't really a rejection of the honor itself so much as a continuation of a pattern she'd maintained her whole career, being careful never to let any single political association define her. It's worth putting that in context against who Trump did successfully honor with the medal during his first term. His list of recipients included longtime Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, former NFL player and Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page, and posthumously Elvis Presley. The Presley parallel is an interesting one. Like Parton, he was a musician who became something much bigger than a musician, a cultural symbol whose reach went far beyond records and concert stages. But where Presley's estate accepted the honor on his behalf, Parton, very much alive and very much in control of her own image, kept declining it in real time. Saying no to an award behind closed doors is one thing. Saying no to a direct question on camera with a reporter pushing for an answer is another matter entirely. And Parton had to do that more than once. In 2018, ABC News correspondent David Wright sat down with Parton and repeatedly tried to get her to address Trump directly. At one point, he reached for a pointed comparison, suggesting a parallel between the president and the sexist, controlling boss character Parton had famously played against in her 1980 comedy 9 to 5. It was about as direct a needle as a reporter could thread, without simply asking her to criticize him outright. Her own most famous villain versus the man in the Oval Office. Parton did not bite. She told Wright plainly that she wasn't going to address that, explaining that she learned a long time ago to keep her opinions to herself if she wanted to stay in show business, and reminding him that she wasn't a politician. She was an entertainer. When Wright pushed back, noting that she was also a role model with real cultural influence, whether she liked it or not, She simply agreed with him. Yes, she said, she was aware of that influence, and that awareness was exactly why she made a point of not commenting on people in news. The 9-to-5 comparison Wright reached for wasn't subtle. In the film, Parton's character worked for a boss named Franklin Hart, a character written to be dishonest, controlling, and sexist from his very first scene. Someone audiences were meant to actively dislike. Asking Parton whether a sitting president reminded her of a role she played 4 decades earlier was as close as a journalist could get at asking her to say something negative about him without asking directly. She still wouldn't take it. That interview essentially became the template for how she handled every Trump-related question for the rest of her career. 2 years later, in conversation with USA Today, she gave one of her clearest explanations yet for why she stayed out of politics altogether. She said she had roughly as many Republican fans as Democratic ones, and she didn't want to risk offending either group by taking a side in fights that weren't hers to referee. She added that Americans have the right to free speech, but that right comes with responsibility for what you actually choose to say with it. She had a family story that summed the whole philosophy up better than any policy explanation could. For years, whenever reporters pushed too hard, she'd fall back on the same joke. Her father was a Republican. Her mother was a Democrat, which made her, and here she deliberately mangled a word, a hypocrite instead of hypocrite. It got a laugh nearly every time, and it also happened to be literally true, a household split right down the political middle, decades before Donald Trump was ever part of the conversation. She expanded on the reasoning again in 2021, telling People magazine that she understood anything she said publicly would be picked up, amplified, and turned into something bigger than she intended. So she chose her words carefully. She said she certainly had her own opinions, the same as anyone, but she didn't consider herself an opinionated person by nature, and she believed faith and personal conviction were meant to be tools people use to build things, not weapons people use against each other. It was a philosophy she applied just as consistently to Trump as to any other polarizing figure who tried to draw her into taking sides. That balancing act held through his entire first term, through the years he spent out of office, and into his return to the White House. But it was tested in a very different, much less political way when a global health crisis briefly brought the two of them together on the same project, without either of them ever framing it that way publicly. Not every point of contact between Parton and Trump involved an award ceremony or an interview trap. In April 2020, during the earliest and most uncertain weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic, Parton donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center to fund early coronavirus research. That gift would later be credited with playing a genuine role in the development of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine. The donation became known informally as the Dolly Parton COVID-19 Research Fund, and it directly supported work being done in the lab of Dr. Mark Dennison at Vanderbilt. Her contribution helped fund the testing methods researchers needed to confirm that a candidate vaccine was actually triggering a strong immune response, a technical but essential step in the process. Months later, the federal government poured roughly $1 billion of its own funding into Moderna's vaccine program as part of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed initiative. That meant Parton's early philanthropy in the president's signature pandemic program ended up supporting the exact same underlying research effort, even though neither side ever publicly connected the dots. Parton never used a moment of praise or criticized the administration overseeing that funding either. Asked later about what motivated the donation, she said simply that she felt something bad was coming and wanted to help, and that she saw her contribution as a small part of a much larger collective effort. In a separate interview with a UK radio station, she went further, saying she probably received more credit than she deserved for the vaccine's eventual success, and that she was just following what felt like the right thing to do at the time. That modesty didn't stop the donation from becoming a minor point of political debate once it resurfaced online years later, with commentators arguing over how much of the credit belonged to her philanthropy versus how much belonged to the federal money the Trump administration had funneled into the same research through Operation Warp Speed. True to form, Parton stayed out of that argument entirely, just as she stayed out of virtually every other one involving the president, letting the science speak for itself while people online debated who deserved the bigger share of the applause. By the time the 2016 election arrived, Parton had already perfected the art of saying just enough to satisfy a reporter without ever actually committing to a position. When comments she made about Hillary Clinton were interpreted by some outlets as an endorsement, she moved quickly to clarify that she hadn't endorsed anyone at all. Asked directly to weigh in on the Clinton-Trump matchup, she landed on a line that let her acknowledge the chaos of the race without taking either candidate's side. She called it the greatest show on television and described both of them as nuts. It was classic Parton. Funny enough to generate headlines on its own, vague enough to avoid real controversy, and delivered with enough charm that almost nobody pushed back on it. That same instinct followed her into later, more personal controversies. In 2023, she released a duet with conservative musician Kid Rock on her Rockstar album and faced some backlash from fans who felt the collaboration clashed with the carefully neutral image she'd spent decades building. She addressed it directly with a Hollywood Reporter, explaining that loving her didn't mean people had to agree with everyone she chose to work with, and that she preferred to accept people rather than write them off entirely over their politics or their mistakes. She tied the whole philosophy back to her Christian faith, arguing that people generally deserve forgiveness rather than permanent judgment. Even the idea of running for office herself, something plenty of celebrities have flirted with over the years, got an immediate no from Parton whenever it came up. Speaking to Metro in 2023, she joked that the country had already had enough boobs in the White House and said plainly that she wasn't qualified for that kind of job. She preferred, she said, to make her difference through music instead of legislation. Reporters kept asking anyway, year after year, because a direct political opinion from someone as widely loved as Parton would have been a genuinely valuable headline. And every single time, she found a new joke, a new deflection, or a gentle correction that let her stay exactly where she wanted to be, admired by people who otherwise agreed on almost nothing else about the state of the country. For most of a decade, that was the entire relationship between Dolly Parton and Donald Trump. An award offered and declined, a question asked and deflected, a joke told instead of an opinion given, and one quiet philanthropic overlap that neither side ever tried to spin for political advantage. Nobody could have predicted that the moment their names would finally be linked together in the biggest way wouldn't come from an award ceremony or a campaign trail at all. It would come from a hospital in Nashville. Dolly Parton died on August 25th, 2026, at the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville at the age of 80, following what her team described as a brief illness. Her nephew and longtime head of security, Brian Seaver, confirmed the news in a video posted to her social media accounts. Tributes began arriving almost immediately from across the entertainment and political worlds. Trump's response came quickly, and it stood in sharp contrast to the years of careful public distance that had defined the relationship while she was alive. He posted on Truth Social, calling her one of the greatest country singers ever, and saying her death was a true loss for millions of people. He wrote that there had never been anyone like her and there never would be again, and he closed the message telling her to rest in peace. What made the moment stand out even more was the formal action that came with it. Trump signed a proclamation ordering that flags of the White House, federal buildings, military posts, embassies, and naval vessels be lowered to half-staff beginning that same evening at 6 o'clock, remaining down through sunset on September 1st, 2026, a full week of national mourning for an entertainer who had spent her career insisting she wanted nothing to do with politics. That gesture fit a pattern Trump had already established earlier in his second term. Less than a year before Parton's death, in September 2025, he had ordered flags lowered nationwide to honor Charlie Kirk, a political activist rather than an office holder, after Kirk was shot and killed at a Utah Valley University event. Extending that same discretion to Parton, a lifelong entertainer with no political office and no political affiliation on record, was a striking extension of a practice traditionally reserved for presidents, vice presidents, and members of Congress, and it did not go unnoticed by longtime observers of how these presidential mourning proclamations typically work. The reaction reached well beyond the president himself. Tennessee's two Republican senators, Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty, each offered their own tributes, calling her an iconic leader and an entrepreneurial force respectively. Republican Representative Diana Harshbarger, whose district includes a Sevier County area where Parton grew up, said that no matter how big her career got, she never stopped being one of their own. Fellow musicians including Reba McEntire, Dionne Warwick, and Casey Musgraves shared personal tributes of their own, alongside actress Julia Roberts, who had starred opposite Parton in Steel Magnolias. Trump was far from the only political figure to weigh in, and the bipartisan nature of the response underscored just how effective Parton's decades of studied political neutrality had actually been. Former President Bill Clinton posted his own tribute, recalling how she rose from her East Tennessee roots and never lost sight of where she came from, and praising her lifelong commitment to literacy through her Imagination Library program. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Kentucky's Democratic Governor Andy Beshear also offered public statements of their own. Watching a Republican president order flags lowered nationwide, while a former Democratic president and a sitting Democratic vice presidential nominee's running mate offered separate, heartfelt tributes on the very same day only reinforced the point Parton had spent her whole life making. Her music and her generosity belonged to everyone, regardless of party. It's worth remembering in the end that Parton spent her entire public life actively trying to stay out of exactly this kind of political spotlight, turning down honors, deflecting interview traps, and joking her way past every question about where her loyalties really stood. In the end, it wasn't an award ceremony or an endorsement that finally linked Trump and Parton's names together in a lasting way. It was a flag lowered in her honor, a tribute written after she could no longer decline it, and a country, regardless of political stripe, pausing together to remember a woman who spent her whole career refusing to choose a side.